Hello and welcome back to the Equilibra Horses Straight and Supple training course, Module 2 of Level 1. Jo Hughes here. In Module 1 we looked at the rich tapestry of the history of classical equitation. In this module we're going to explore the present day and where the future is headed in this new exciting age of classical horse training. As you have all learned from the How Horses Learn, Feel and Communicate course, it's only been relatively recently, over the span of history, that we've really begun to understand the science behind how animals learn, as well as understanding more about mammalian emotions and species-specific behaviour. A massive pivotal change in Britain began in 1877, when Anna Sewell published Black Beauty, which I'm sure all of you have read. This bestseller fueled awareness about the ethics of how we used horses in the 19th century. It was this movement that was to spark a rethink of the laws concerning equine and other animal welfare in Britain, actually. Around the same time as this public awakening of concerns around equine welfare, the scientific study of behaviour, psychology, was born. As we know, of course, scientific research over the last 100 years has given us a much deeper understanding of exactly how horses learn: classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Ivan Pavlov, whose research resulted in our understanding of classical conditioning, published his book Conditioned Reflexes in 1927. And B.F. Skinner, whose research identified and developed the scientific principles of operant conditioning in the 1930s. So that's only approximately 80 to 100 years ago. During the 1960s, Skinner's work achieved its greatest prominence. He had discovered those basic laws of nature governing the way that individuals, regardless of species, learn or acquire new behaviour. These two men played a fundamental part in the development of the study of learned behaviour, which is called behaviourism. Given that the history of classical equitation has spanned 2,500 years, these developments are very, very recent indeed, and they've added enormously to our understanding of how and why the horses actually learnt to perform those behaviours, leading to that ultimate lightness that I've spoke about in Module 1, as a result of the classical training throughout its long history. Alongside this knowledge of the behavioural laws of learning, we also now have even more recent research still from neuroscientists into understanding animal emotions, such as Panksepp's work within the field of affective neuroscience. So we now know that classical equitation has historically relied on the use of aversive stimuli to train the horse by motivating him to escape and avoid experiencing something unpleasant, uncomfortable, or painful. And more importantly, the emotional feelings that go hand in hand with the use of those aversive stimuli are that of fear, resulting in all the psychological and biological stress responses that the fear system produces. So, what exactly is a reward? The Collins English Dictionary defines a reward as something given or received in return for a deed or a service rendered. We know that the classical masters placed much emphasis on reward. However, this more recent scientific knowledge has given us clarification of exactly what defines that reward. Rewards are positive reinforcers, they're appetitives. They are things that we will work to gain, to bring into our lives. So just a quick recap then of the actual scientific definition of positive reinforcement. It's the addition of an appetitive or pleasurable stimulus which increases the frequency of the behaviour response. So interestingly, what this additional knowledge from Skinner and Pavlov has given us is to highlight a disparity between what the classical masters believed to be rewarding to the horse and the actual scientific definition of reward in a scientific learning sense. As I mentioned in Module 1, French classical principles rely on the release of the aids, descente de main, as it's known in French equitation, as the reward for the horse towards lightness, balance and agility. La Guédinière explained it as follows. By means of releasing or lowering the hands and legs for a moment, the rider expresses his thanks to the horse and incites it to strive for even greater levels. Anja Behren explains that Steinbrecht, furthermore, also spoke of ceasing to apply the aids in order to reward the horse, and thus again practiced the descente de la main. This process of releasing has been believed to be a reward for the horse for centuries, thereby being the reason for the resulting increase in both motivation and lightness in the horse. However, we now know from Skinner's work that the learning process upon which this release of the aids relies was defined back in the 1930s as negative reinforcement, or otherwise known as pressure and release, and so thus explaining exactly why it encouraged the horse to become lighter with time. That learning by the horse due to the release of the aids relies on the application and removal of aversive stimuli to motivate, form and then reinforce behaviour. So yes, indeed, the horse learns to avoid the onset of the aversive pressure and becomes progressively lighter and more supple eventually. But it's not a technically rewarding experience that they find pleasurable or enjoyable. They're not working to gain the appetitive stimulus, such as food or a lip-curling scratch, but instead they're working to seek relief from a painful, uncomfortable or unpleasant aversive stimulus. So seeking relief from and avoiding aversive stimuli produces unpleasant experiences and feelings, as we know. So animals will actually work to turn these aversive brain systems off when given the choice to do so. They are the bad feelings of the primal emotional brain. Karen Pryor, in her book Reaching the Animal Mind, states, thanks to Jack Panksepp, we now have a scientific rationale for why mixing correction and reinforcement is harmful rather than helpful to learning. It's not just a moral issue, it's common sense. Correction switches the learner from the hypothalamus in the brain and its seeking mode to the amygdala's path of avoidance and fear. So coming back to the classical masters now and their writings, La Guédinière expressed that the horse schooled with maximum finesse may be directed with the reins attracted by the concept of gravity. He defined lightness as the willingness of the horse to obey the rider voluntarily. By the time this level of learning or training has occurred, the rider is able to direct the horse with loose or even dropped reins, whilst continuing to do the exercises with the horse in a truly balanced self-carriage. This yielding of the rein is called the descente de main, as I've explained previously in French equitation, and it refers to the lowering or the relaxing and the releasing of the hand. So actually, I hope you can sort of start to see that the maximum finesse that the classical masters spoke of is actually in reality maximum avoidance of aversive stimuli for the horse. It's not the reward that the masters thought it was. Through progressive classical training, when done well using negative reinforcement or pressure and relief, the horse learns to avoid the onset of those painful, uncomfortable or unpleasant aversives by becoming increasingly responsive to reliable predictor signals, such as slight subtle changes in weight of the rider, or even the body language of the human on the floor, and seat changes, definitely seat changes from the rider in the saddle. Those conditioned predictor signals, or the conditioned aversives, threaten the onset of escalation to a more painful or uncomfortable aversive if the horse doesn't respond to the early signal. And so they begin to respond to lighter and lighter aids, eventually reaching what the masters described as the ultimate lightness, as the horse's suppleness and agility develops and grows. But because we've now got this modern knowledge regarding how horses learn in the most enjoyable and ethical and effective way, utilising those appetitive feel-good emotions and feelings, we have another way to be able to teach and train our horses progressively towards that same ultimate balance, suppleness and eventually lightness, without needing to rely on training using compulsion and coercion as a result of those aversives, as it has been achieved throughout history, throughout those 2,500 years. We can truly give the horse genuine freedom of choice, as well as nurture that trusting relationship between us instead of damaging it by the use of aversives. Optimizing positive reinforcement and appetitives during the horse's training allows us to be able to genuinely reward our horses, enabling them to feel confident, relaxed, happy and empowered. So if we remember back to my words in Module 1, where I explained that the principles of the art of classical equitation are about developing a mutually trusting, harmonious relationship between the horse and the rider. The human strives to fully understand both the physical and psychological state of his horse, and therefore through reward-based progressive gymnastic training, the horse develops to perform to his absolute potential. So by training behaviours using the 7 ways to form behaviours positively, with the emphasis on motivating horses appetitively through positively reinforcing behaviour responses, legitimately actually does achieve those goals of the classical principles, not just behaviourally and therefore physically over time, but also emotionally and therefore psychologically as well. My belief is that, barring injury, obviously, every horse can be developed to execute some Grand Prix level movements. If you don't believe me, then just watch some horses in their natural state. A stallion courting his mare, or horses at play. They happily perform pirouettes, passage, piaffe and extensions with the beauty, ease and finesse born entirely from self-motivation, choice and an absence of correction and coercion. Trained without aversives, we can achieve those same goals as the mainstream classical equitation, progressively mobilising the horse, developing his strength over the long term from the ground first. It allows him to learn in such a powerfully pleasurable and enjoyable way. The horse keenly becomes more collected over time, but this is combined with the same enjoyable motivations as those which drive him naturally. So let's take a look at some of this fun, emotional enjoyment and the natural physical ability that horses possess to execute these movements in day-to-day life. This video shows one of our horses, Norman, naturally demonstrating some stunning steps of passage. So passage is an advanced dressage movement where the horse is highly elevated as a result of being very, very balanced and collected. It suspends its legs off the ground for a longer period than in other trot types, and it moves with great impulsion, so lots of energy. And so the trot appears to kind of be happening in slow motion. Horses in play very often also demonstrate some stunningly balanced, light and collected movement. Play is one of the appetitive brain systems, and so it's incredibly joyful and a fun experience. This piece of footage shows Ellie, my young horse, executing some beautifully balanced movement during play. Horses can easily execute naturally balanced and light movement, as well as classical collection, naturally all on their own, but they need to learn how to be able to move in that same balanced way under the weight of a rider. That simply cannot happen without gymnastic training, as you're going to learn as you move through this course. The next video clip shows one of my mare Dancer's first steps ever in true half pass with the correct bend, unrestrained at liberty. So shaping and targeting were used to create this final behaviour. You'll learn more about exactly what half pass is in the next two modules, but in a nutshell, half pass is when the horse moves diagonally forward with a small amount of flexion towards the direction that they're travelling. The forehand can be very slightly ahead of the hindquarters in this movement. The components needed to be trained for this behaviour were developed progressively over a fairly long period due to the half pass being a fairly advanced and challenging gymnastic movement. It's much more mentally and physically challenging than, for instance, the shoulder in, which will again be explained more fully in the following modules. I will just say here though that in accordance with the classical principles, due to this movement's advanced nature in terms of the balance and the suppleness needed, The half pass should only be taught to a horse that has good collection already and is well established in the basic lateral movements already of shoulder in, quarters in, and renvers. Dancers' training of these three behaviours, the quarters in, renvers, and then half pass, developed slowly over time as her balance and her suppleness and her strength gradually improved, along with her psychological ability to respond to combined cues. As this progressed, she began offering me the bend in response to my cue, letting me know that she'd developed enough, both physically and emotionally, for me to begin asking for this half pass directly. Classical equitation is about training a horse towards high school movements through building a mutually trusting, positive relationship between the horse and the rider. When done well, this process, as well as the resulting agility, straightness, and therefore collection, preserve and prolong the soundness of the horse. Each of the masters had their own interpretations and applications of their art, arising from dedicating their lives to practical exploration and application. They each added their individual colours to the rich tapestry of classical riding, as have and will other talented individuals continue to do so on this journey of training horses towards this ultimate goal of lightness. With this fantastic recent emergence of the modern evidence-based scientific era that we are so lucky to have at our fingertips, we've got access to new information in equine behaviour, ethology, neuroscience, equine anatomy, and biomechanics as well, actually, as it arises within the field of scientific research. The evolution of classical equitation will continue on into the future as these two worlds merge together. The application and the practical means of achieving the classical principles is already changing, and I have absolutely no doubt it will continue to evolve into the future from here. The fact that you're here watching this module's lecture means that you too are a part of this growing tapestry of change in classical horse training. It's a real pleasure to have you here with us inside the Academy exploring this innovative path. My passionate goal is to develop that age-old classical lightness, but by forming the behaviours positively with plenty of appetitives, so that the horse is able to truly enjoy their training, remaining relaxed and happy as they become straighter and more balanced and into a posture that is healthy for them. I do believe that La Guardiniere summed it up absolutely brilliantly when he said or wrote, "Every science and every art has its principles and its rules which lead to new discoveries and to perfection. Why should horsemanship be the only art for which practice alone is needed?" The future isn't a place where where we're going to go. It's actually a place that we all get to create, and we all get to create it in a very, very unique way because of the cues that we can develop for the behaviours between us and our individual horse. They can all be completely different. So I'll leave you with this thought, and I will see you in the next module, where we're going to be taking a look at the natural asymmetry of our equine friends. My belief is that the blending of a deeper understanding of equine behaviour and how horses learn in the most pleasurable way with the wisdoms of classical training, albeit via a shifted interpretation and a different practical application, allows a greater vision as to where the future of this art is headed. I'd just like to take a moment to kindly request that you respect the copyrights that are detailed in full in the terms and conditions on our website.